Hey everyone, welcome to Burn Culture's Message of the Week. It's our desire for you to encounter the presence of God in a fresh way as you engage with this word. If you would like more information about what the Lord is doing through our Kingdom family, visit our website at www.burnculture.org.
All right, good morning, good morning.
Good morning.
You figured we'd start with a couple knock-knock jokes?
It's helpful.
Not just because we're smaller in number, but we wanted it to be more conversational this morning. So in that, we'll pray and we'll just kind of jump right in together. Lord, we love you, and we just feel really honored, Lord, to be together, to be able to sit together and to look at you and to look at your word and to allow your Spirit to continue to encourage us and instruct us, to shape and form us, and to help us, Lord. We're asking you for help this morning in the area of the responsibility that we have with our kids. What a joy. Lord, what a unique responsibility to be able to invest in the lives of little people that you give us. Lord, we really do want to love you well and honor you. And so we just ask you for help with this morning. Would you speak to our hearts like only you can? And would you continue to just advance your purposes in each one of our lives and then our spheres of influence in the lives of those that we lead. We love you with all of our hearts, Jesus. In your name we pray. Amen. All right. To jump in this morning again, we feel really honored to be able to share with you guys. We're not, again, going to pretend like we know everything. We do have I guess you could say some stock or some equity in the game. We have 6 kids. So we've, over 18 years, have 6 children and 2 miscarriages. So I feel like we've spent a lot of time pregnant or with nursing babies or in between, whatever that phase would be, and sometimes overlapping seasons. Multiple kids in diapers at different times and just been in it. I remember when we had one child and felt like our whole world was overwhelmed with one. All right, it's funny, now we find ourselves often across the table or in different settings with people who have one child and their life is overwhelmed and they're just in it, and it's all relevant, right? I mean, it's all relevant, and it's real, and it's reality for, the season you're in and wherever you're at, and then they ask us, they're like, man, you know what we're talking about? Like, how many kids do you guys have? And we're like, well, I mean, we have 6. We're like, oh, right? And then they feel better about where they are. They imagine that we understand because we've been through the different seasons and cycles. So we have 6. We say we have 7 because our niece moved in with us last year. So when she moved in, she was 20. She's now 21. But the ages we have that are ours, 3 girls and 3 boys. And including our niece, so she's 21, and then ours are 15, 12, 10, 6, 3, or 10 months. Going to be 11 months. So we've got a young adult ministry, a youth group. We've got a kids' church. We've got a nursery. We've got it all under one roof. And so, I mean, we do have 6. That doesn't mean we're qualified by any means to speak in a setting like this. All right, sometimes people think the more kids you have, the more you know. That's not always accurate. You can have a whole bunch of kids and not necessarily feel like you know anything or feel like anything's going well, right? So we want to kind of set the framework on, what our evaluation has been. We have a unique age spread. With our first three, they were 5, 3, and newborn. And so if you just take that ratio, 5, 3, and newborn, then between the youngest at that time and what is our next three, there was a 4-year gap. And our second three are going to be 5, 3, or they were 5, 3, and newborn. So we have the exact same spread across 2 different sets of 3 with a 4-year gap in between. That was not on purpose.
Yeah, so what had happened was.
I think everybody knows what had happened.
No, honestly, we had 2 kids. So we had a girl and a boy, and we felt like we were killing it. Like, it was like, you know what? This isn't that bad. Like, I feel like we've heard a lot of horror stories. Like, this is, it's not that bad. I feel like, because we always
With
said
the first
2.
2, for sure.
We said we wanted 2, a girl and a boy.
I had a favorite
And
daughter, a favorite son. It was amazing.
And then I had the idea that I wanted another little girl. And so after, again, harassing Mike, if you weren't here last night, I do a lot of harassing, convincing Mike for another one, we had a little girl. And then I was done. I was like, that's enough. We're done. She was very sassy, stubborn from the get-go. And I was like, okay, we're done. Like,
She was colic.
yeah.
So we had a season where she screamed for 8 hours a day.
We felt like we were doing really well, and then realized we knew nothing
4
and
months.
didn't want to do it anymore. So there was a very hard 4-year gap of resistance, and then the Lord had the idea about all the others, and so.
So we had our first 2 that were super easy, and then our third one made us realize, they're not all the same.
Right.
No, they're not all the same. Like, you can put all of them in the same scenario, but you just don't get the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah, which I think it's a beautiful point, I think, of just even us in life together and like asking the Lord to actually like build us as a kingdom family, like what that actually looks like in the earth. Because I feel like many of us enter into marriage and family and the ideas of what we wanted. Like I said, we wanted 2 kids. Like, this is great. 2 kids, boy and girl. I had the great idea, I want another little girl, had another little girl, and then I was done. But then the Lord began to wreck my life by his voice, pertaining to children, family, and his plans. So we don't have 6 kids on accident. I know it might look like, oh, wow, like you have 6 kids, like you only wanted 2, so all the other ones are an accident. It was actually very purposeful by the Lord, and we had to respond to the invitation of saying yes to him. So I also don't want it to seem like, oh, you just got a lot of kids because you don't know what you're doing. We understand how they got here. So it's just a big part of, I think, even in the conversation of the blueprint of family and when it comes to family and the decisions that we make together on what life is supposed to look like. His voice is everything in the picture. Because like he said, like we might feel like we have it together, but it's like it's only his grace that leads us into moments of saying yes, to yield, to allowing him to even expand what we even feel like our capacity is. So maybe you feel like your capacity is like, I can't do any more than 1. But it's like, well, if we allow the Lord's voice to enter in, so that's kind of what happened, and he's wrecked our world, and we love it. It's amazing. I'm so glad, so.
Yeah, that's not to say that everyone's life looks that way, right? Because it can be challenging to hear, well, before every one of our children, even though it is true, before every single one of them, it was preceded by a season of conversation that the Lord brought up between us about having another one, intentional time spent together in praying about whether or not we should actually commit to the Lord to have another one. So that part is actually very true. That was every single one of them. We find ourselves in places. I remember I was at the grocery store a couple of weeks ago, and I just had my oldest and my 6-year-old. And I had Araya and Isaiah, and we were there, and I don't remember what we had on the line that we were checking out with, but the lady looked at me and she was like, oh, wow, looking at my kids. And I was like, no. Oh, we had chips, and they like different flavors, so there were more than 2 flavors. That doesn't even matter. But she was like, oh, yeah, that's a lot of chips. And I was like, well, I got a lot of kids. And she was looking at me, and she was like, yeah, 2's a lot these days. And I was like, no, actually, this is a fraction of what I've got going on. And she looked at me all confused, a little bit of an older lady. And she was like, what do you mean a fraction? I was like, no, I have 6. And she was like, 6? And her first question was, all with the same woman? And I was like, yeah, like we've been together now 18 years, all 6 with the same woman. I was like, she's like, wait, and they all live in the same house? I was like, yes, they all live in the same house. And she was like, God bless you, buddy. And I was like, well, I do believe the Lord has blessed me for sure. But I think it's a great place even to begin. I want to start by reading a couple of verses from Genesis chapter 1. So if you have a way to turn there, you can turn with me to Genesis chapter 1. We'll turn down to the very end of Genesis chapter 1. And very familiar verses. This is in the very beginning. It's in the creation account. Genesis chapter 1, we'll go all the way down to verse 26. And so starting with 26 of Genesis 1, it says, Then God said, Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And then God said, Behold, I've given you every plant yielding seed that is on the surface of the earth, and every tree which is fruit yielding seed, it shall be food for you. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the sky, and to everything that moves on the earth which has life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. And God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning on that 6th day. We're all very familiar with the charge here in the creation account, that God has chosen out of a desire that he has in his heart to create a context in order for him to reveal himself, in order for him to be known, right? God is what we would consider to be sovereign, all-powerful. All-powerful meaning he has no needs. Right? If you have needs, then you simultaneously can't be considered all-powerful, because the idea is out of your sense of having power for everything, you are also then able to satisfy any need that you have. So God has no needs, and we would all agree to that. But that does not mean that God does not have desires. Desires and needs are different. And so there's a desire, there's a longing in the heart of God to be known. To have people in order to share himself with, to walk with, to live in intimate fellowship with. And so God creates a context. He creates a domain or an arena of sorts, if you would. The great stage of life. God goes to extravagant lengths in order to create this context and then to form these humans, which are going to be his prized possession, his crowning achievement. They're going to be made in his likeness or in his image, as we read here. And these humans are going to live in fellowship with God. And out of living in fellowship, or in the place of living fellowship, they are going to be God's chosen representative in this context or in this arena. And this is actually a really big deal, because the Lord speaks to those that are going to represent him in this arena and says to them, Be fruitful and multiply, because I have given you dominion. You are my chosen representatives in this context. And in this context, you are going to embody my dominion. I am giving you the ability to rule and to carry my authority in the context that I have created. And in this space, I want to be known. And so I'm going to reveal myself first to you, and then you are going to spread the knowledge of God to the furthest corners of what is this known creation. So here we have these humans, male and female, right, who end up being Adam and Eve. And in this space, their responsibility is actually to be fruitful. It's to live a fruitful life in the place of fellowship with God, which is going to be central even to the way that they know one another. And then through the covenant engagement or responsibility of being God's representatives, they are to now multiply. And out of intimacy with God and intimacy one with another, they are going to multiply these little image bearers made in the likeness of God, created with the purpose of representing him in the earth. Right? It's a massive ordeal, and we get it all in the very first chapter. Because if we can understand the terms that are being set and actually the war that is waged in the first couple of chapters in Genesis, we understand a lot about the issues throughout the biblical narrative as the Bible continues to unfold. And as more people get involved and more nations begin to surface and all kinds of issues seem to arise or to erupt, it actually comes back to a very simple issue. In the beginning, God chose his representatives for this domain. Well, in the same space, there were rebels. And we get that when we turn over to Genesis 3. We know that the serpent, the enemy, the Satan, the deceiver is there, leading the charge of rebellion against God, looking for an influence in the context that God created in order to corrupt love and devotion in the place of living fellowship with God, in order to have those who would be under his influence and in essence come along to bear his image in the same context that God created and desired to have image bearers or representatives. And so when you see the divide, where there's now God's influence in the world and there's now the enemy's influence in the world, and there are hearts of people that are being corrupted by the influence of the wicked one in the world, we don't have to look very far to be able to acknowledge that there's a discipleship effort that is in the world. John, in 1 John 5:19, he says it this way: "Beloved, we know that we belong to God, but we know that the rest of the world is under the sway of the wicked one." Paul, in Ephesians 2, which I mentioned this momentarily last night, says that there's a spirit of the air, that there's rulers and powers. He mentions in Ephesians 6, but in Ephesians 2, he says there's a spirit that is in the air, that is at work in the sons of disobedience. And it's charging them or energizing them, corrupting them to live a self-indulgent way of life, a life ruled by the feelings of the flesh and the thoughts of the mind. Paul, in Romans 12, verses 1 and 2, verse 2 specifically, he says, "Be transformed by the renewing of your mind, and do not be conformed to the pattern that is in the world." So we need to at least be willing to acknowledge that there's a pattern in the world. There is a spirit that is in the air. There is rulers and powers creating a sway, attempting to swallow up the hearts and lives of people by their discipleship influence. So when it comes all the way back to Genesis 1, the charge in Genesis 1 is, I've chosen you as my representatives. I've actually given you authority in this domain. Be fruitful and multiply. And as you continue to live in this vibrant place of fellowship with me, I'm going to continue to reveal myself to you, and out of the unveiling of the knowledge of God in your life, I am going to transform you, and then out of your own transformation and the fellowship that you've received with me in this intimate interaction, I'm now asking you to provide those that you are bearing forth. You are multiplying, you are being fruitful. All of what is the fruit of your life in the place of children, raise them up in the knowledge of God and train them in this intimate place of fellowship, how to be my representatives in the earth. So we understand family in this way, and it's actually very, very helpful for us because it creates not just a paradigm, which it does that, but it also creates a sifting tool for decisions we make, things we do, things we don't do, what we would consider to be the ultimates or the non-negotiables, which we'll get to all of that, because all of that is dramatic in the measure of importance to actually bearing the responsibility to be fruitful and then to have the privilege to develop the lives of God's little representatives that he's entrusted into our home and unto our care. Yeah. So from the very beginning, it's you're gonna be fruitful and you're gonna multiply. But realize that there's another influence in the world that wants to corrupt your discipleship efforts in your home. There's a spirit that's in the air, a sway that's in the world, a pattern of sorts that the world's influence wants to conform all of its little disciples to. And so recognizing that, we understand family in the context of cultivating God's dominion on the earth. Yeah. First in our own lives, by the way that we are submitted to God, and then in the responsibility of actually training the lives of children to embody God's dominion on the earth. To live a life that's submitted to the authority or the jurisdiction, the kingship, the lordship, the leadership of Jesus. To actually embody that as a way of life. And as a byproduct, embodying the dominion of Jesus as king to then live experientially, consistently free from the influence that is in the world, and to be able to do that in a joyful way because of the cultivation of fellowship with God that we know even from a very young age. So to get into some like more practicals, our way of life, we understand in the responsibility of parenting primarily as evangelism and discipleship. I'll never forget, I'm looking at Mikael because we were going to Africa together. This was 2015. So 10 years ago, we were going to do a crusade together in Africa. And 10 years ago, man, I'm sitting in my little part of my house where I would sit and pray. And man, I'm just praying my guts out about this meeting that we're going to have. Man, we're going to have several days in Africa. Man, we're just hoping that God rips open the skies, glory, like all kinds of crazy stuff goes down. And as I'm sitting in that chair praying about, we're going to Zambia, we're going to have this meeting. Man, like we've invested, like tens of thousands of dollars, on and on it goes, and wanting to be faithful and do it right. As I'm sitting in that chair praying, the Lord said to me, "You really believe that these meetings are going to be great?" And I was like, oh yeah, yes, Lord, right? Like, yeah, well, what else are you going to say? And the Lord said to me, "Evangelize your kids." I was like, what? And I was in some ways like super offended at first. Because I was like, man, like, do you know whose house they live in? You know what I'm saying? Like, we're trying. You know what I mean? We're about this life, we're really trying to do this thing. And the Lord was like, you have to evangelize them and bring them to the place where they have the opportunity to be able to choose me. you make assumptions about them because of the context they live in. But the context they live in doesn't create any guarantees. Like, you have to be intentional. It's not just your life or your wife's life. Those things are important, but that does not guarantee that your children are born again. Yeah. Right? And it was a very hard conclusion for me that my children are not born again, even though I believe that about other people's kids, right? Like, no, I know some other people's kids are not born again, right? Like, I mean, my kids were at a Christian school. I know that there are other kids who are not born again, right? But it was challenging for me because it was like, oh, wow, okay, then I'm going to have to change my thoughts about how I'm being intentional in my home. Like, my kids are not born believers. They need to be evangelized. Yeah. And that may be a difficult thought because we have the best intentions and maybe we're doing all the stuff to provide them with the right opportunities and we're training them in the right values. But what we need to understand is they can grow up with all the right activities and still, on a heart level, never have actually made choices for themselves. Yeah. And there's a difference. There's a difference between trying to mold behaviors, which is, in some ways, I'll use the word militant parenting. Yeah, it's control. Like militant parenting, where we're just trying to control the terms. Yeah. Where we're just trying to govern the reality of activities that we have in our home. There's a difference between militant style parenting and then actually shepherding them with the gospel. There's a difference. Yeah. And much of what we do is in the area of evangelism and discipleship. We want to evangelize our kids or provide a consistent space where God can be known. I'll say that in the area of evangelism. We want to create a consistent space where God can be known, where they can encounter the knowledge of God for themselves, where they can have God unveiled to their hearts and actually be confronted with a decision about God for themselves. I'll call that evangelism, a space where God can be known. And we want to live intentional in affording them the opportunity to have to be confronted with God and to come to a conclusion about Him in their own heart. And then discipleship. It's training to love God above all things, to honor God as a way of life. And these two aspects actually govern everything that we do in the area of parenting. Everything in the area of parenting is aimed evangelistically or oriented towards discipleship. And once they've come to conclusions about the Lord, actually then training them how to love God as a way of life. I love when you fast forward through Genesis and you get to Genesis chapter 18, and God is speaking about Abram and the call that's on Abram's life. It's Genesis 18, verse 18 and 19. And it's when the three visitors come to Abram's tent, and, Abram is hosting them, and, he's in intercession. And the idea is the angel of the Lord, or those that are there together, he says, how are we going to fulfill the call that's on Abram's life? He's a man that carries a promise to actually be a blessing to all the nations of the world. Out of him is going to come a people, yet he does not even have one son. And God says, this is how we're going to do it. Abram, go home first and lead your house in the knowledge of God and in the ways of righteousness. Another translation says, Abram, go home and train your household according to the knowledge of God and the things that are right according to the Lord, or the fear of the Lord. I love it because the charge was to Abram. He didn't say, find you a great church that you can blame when your kids aren't living the way that you think they should be. He doesn't say, make sure that you up your tithe so that you can hire the right youth pastor. He says, Abram, you go home. And I think it's time that we start looking at the Bible again and not at the culture. for the responsibility that we have as parents. I think biblically there's a charge for us to be responsible for the trajectory of our kids' lives and the formation of their spirituality. Where I just hear so many times, like, well, I'm too busy for that, and the excuses are endless. I will say it this way. You are your children's pastor. You are your children's youth pastor, young adult pastor, and there is no one in your children's life that has more authority by the Spirit than you. Not a single minister, ministry leader, not a single person has more authority in your children's lives and influence in their development and their spiritual formation than you do. And we've been charged that as parents. And so he says, Abram, you go home and actually learn how to train your family. Now I get it. It can be an overwhelming task. We gather in houses often. And, one of the things that people ask us when they show up with kids and they see all the kids that are, in our gatherings at times, and the look of terror sets in on them, as they're entering into a home space is, well, what do you guys do with the kids? Well, with the kids, we do the same thing that we do. They're like, well, no. Well, who's going to take care of the kids then, like during the gathering? Well, you are, if they're yours. It's like the 12 tribes around here. Like everybody kind of mans their own, tribe of sorts. But it opens up great conversation because usually people are worried that in that setting, their kids are not going to perform well. Well, if I put them in a house with a bunch of other people and, they're not going to sit there and they're not going to worship and they're not going to this and they're not going to that. And usually the conversation, it is confrontational, but we do not try to make it that way or really aggressive. Usually the conversation goes something like this. Well, if it's foreign to them, meaning if there's not a regular practice at home where you guys are sitting together, where you're trying to read the Bible together, to worship Jesus together, to spend time in prayer together, then I don't anticipate that little Johnny is going to do amazing in this setting. I don't think it's going to go well at all. And it's in some ways difficult for you to imagine that little Johnny is going to be able to perform well if you're not providing ongoing or consistent training at home in certain areas, right? And so it's unrealistic to think that we can shovel away the responsibility to try to bring real formation to our children's lives to other people who may have them like we did when we youth pastored 2 hours a week. And then the parents have them the other 166 hours a week and yet blame us for the reason why they're doing the things they're doing and living the way they're living. So, I think it's a healthy charge and reminder for us. Man, like the Lord has entrusted us with our kids. And family is not an inconvenience. Abram, go home and train your family. Well, that's going to get in the way of other opportunities that I have. It's going to get in the way of other work-related issues. It's going to get in the way of my ministry ambitions if I'm spending too much time at home. We have to stop seeing family as an inconvenience or as some unnecessary, unhealthy burden to the other more ultimate things that I feel like my life is aimed at. What could be more ultimate than being entrusted with eternal souls? You're not only training children for this life or this age, but you've been charged with the privilege and the responsibility to bring spiritual formation to the lives of souls that are going to actually enter into the age to come, either unto reward or unto judgment, because of a life lived while having time in the flesh. And the charge that we have as parents to actually invest into the lives of, little men, little women that are going to grow up into adults that are going to live full lives and that are going to have to make a decision over the time of their lifetime about who God is and what they're going to do about that. There is going to be eternal consequences for that investment. And so what could be more important than actually stewarding over, actually being faithful in the burden to invest into the lives of eternal people, like eternal realities here. All 6 of mine are going to stand before the Lord one day. And yes, the Lord is going to have something to say to them, but the Lord is also going to have something to say to me. And I believe he's going to have more to say to me about the lives of my 6 than any altar call I've ever made, any crusade stage I've ever been on, any conference setting I've ever been in, any YouTube video, podcast episode, TV show or set I've ever been on. There's going to be more conversation in the area of my 6, and that's because they've been intimately charged to my care for me to train them how to actually live in fellowship with God, be his representative in the world, and honor him as a way of life. And he's going to talk to me about that. Abram, go home and start training your house. And so I want to talk to dads, and I'm not saying you're not involved, but I'll just say it this way. You got to be involved. You got to be involved. It's not mom's responsibility to train the kids in spirituality while you go to work. It's just not. Well, you don't understand. No, I do understand. I do understand that culturally we've made a lot of exemptions and a lot of excuses. I will tell you this, there is nothing more powerful than children watching their dad open the Bible up, pray, weep in the presence of God, worship together as a family. There is nothing more marking in the life of a child than these family times together, but the reality of a father. You ain't got to be a theologian. I'm not saying you got to have answers for every biblical question and you got to be some, great scholar and all of this. Man, read the Bible together. Yeah. Like spend time praying together. Like actually be committed, devoted to the Lord in regular priestly rhythms as a family. We're a family that's going to worship God. No, not just mom and the kids. And I'm just not going to go to work and create a way of life for you guys to be able to do that. No, Abram, you go home and train your house. You got to be involved in the evangelistic efforts, in the discipleship efforts. Well, man, I don't really know what I'm doing. Well, figure it out. Talk to somebody who knows what they're doing. Like not knowing what to do is not enough of an excuse to do nothing. You got to figure it out. You got to find somebody that knows what they're doing. You got to leverage the resources that are available to you. You got to look at somebody that's further along down the road than you and create a reference point and say, man, your kids love God. Your kids have families of their own. Your kids are honoring the Lord in these different spheres of influence. What did you do? What did you do in the days when it was just super frustrating? When I just had little kids everywhere, it didn't seem like anything was working. We were just trying to give it the best go we had, and we just wanted to give up every day. What did you actually do? So it's important. Abram, go home. Abram, go home. But then it's important to have a unified vision of what that life actually looks like together. Because it can't just be one-sided. If you want to.
Yeah. No, I was thinking about that as he was talking, even in Genesis 1:28, when the charge is given to subdue the earth. The charge was not just one-sided. It was actually for both of them. And when I consider the word subdue, it's interesting because it's take authority and be a good steward. And I wish last night, actually Mike and I were driving back to the house last night, and I was like, man, I wish we had more time to kind of like talk about marriage, just even specifically about the roles of the house and the way culture has led us to believe what the role identity in the house actually is and the way God sees it, because I feel like it's two different things. So just even in consideration, it's like we've both been called to take authority and to be a good steward. Now, that doesn't mean for us as women is we are now trying to overextend ourselves above the authority of our husbands. But it's actually like us through, again, as we talked about last night, through submission, but together. That doesn't mean I'm now exempt from my own devotion with the Lord and my own pattern that I'm presenting and living out before my children. It's actually very important that we both have our individual times of devotion to the Lord, but then also together when it comes to making decisions and the authority in our home, they see the examples from both sides. He's the priest of our homes, but so am I. I have a priestly duty unto the Lord. So I think at times it's very easy to just deflect and allow all the authority of the spirituality of our house to be given to him. But we actually have a responsibility too. That's, again, not to lord it over our husbands. We submit to their responsibility as priests of their home, but we also have a priestly duty to do. So I was just even considering Proverbs 22, train up a child in the way he should go, and then even when he's old, he will not depart from it. And so just even talking about authority doesn't mean, as Mike even say, we're now militant or try to control. It's actually, again, through submission, we have authority, and it's not that we are painting a picture of like, this is where you have to go, like to even our children. We feel like each one of them have been uniquely, obviously, created and crafted by the Lord, and even what they're going to do when they get out of our house is going to be unique to each and every one of them. So I feel like even at times that small thing of what you touched on, it's not about control, because I feel like sometimes authority and control can be easily like confused, and we can easily begin to start operating in control while not ever realizing that the training that we're doing in control is not leading them to purpose. So I think even that also is really important, because each of them are unique, and even how it says in Psalm 127, like arrows in the hands of a warrior. They're all going to be sent out to accomplish purpose and destiny. So I feel like for all of our children in the home, looking at mom and dad both, like what does it look like day to day? What does our devotion, what does us together being on the same page and actually not being divided even in decisions that we make is big. My 6-year-old right now, he's in that phase. He goes and talks to dad. And it's like, hey, Dad, can I have this? No. Hey, Mom, can I have this? What did Dad say? Dad said no. Okay, well, that's the answer. Just even like small things like that. Like, I feel like being together in the authority of your home is really important. You want me to keep going? I'm just kidding.
You can.
No, I'm kidding. Just kidding.
I think it'd be helpful because, obviously one, for the sake of time, but then two, just for the sake of the practicalities. It's easy to talk in these kind of like bigger ideas and themes. And, oftentimes then the thought is like, okay, man, like amazing. So what do I do when I go home? Like, awesome, inspirational little talk. Like, I'm going home now. What am I supposed to now do? Because our life is committed to the Lord a certain way, and because we recognize a biblical responsibility, and we're not necessarily aiming at the cultural definitions for success. Our life looks a certain way. And the way that it looks, there's kind of a template of sorts where we've established things that we consider to be non-negotiables in what our life looks like, how we're going to walk out life together, organize our life day by day, and pray through and consider certain opportunities at times or invitations or things that are going to try to pull our family or the attention or the activity of our family in different directions. For instance, we have 6 kids, right? So already from the start, oftentimes the thought is 6 kids is an inconvenience. I remember sitting with someone in Brazil years ago, and him telling me at the time they had 2 kids, and he was just sharing with me how, their life was set up and 2 kids was ideal because they could take the kind of vacations they wanted to take, and it didn't, affect their way of life that they desired, and because of their income and their opportunities, and they wouldn't have to change the car that they drove, and, just all of these types of things, because life is super practical, right? Like, I got 6 kids. I don't have a little Toyota Corolla, right? Like, my whole family's not gonna fit in that. But I remember sitting with him and him just going on and on about how appreciative he was for the life that they had and what an inconvenience it would be if they had more kids. Now, this was as a response to me sharing that we had just had our 3rd, right? So us just having our 3rd and his idea that his 2 was ideal and what an inconvenience it would be to have another one. And as I was just sitting there listening, I felt like the Lord, I'll say it that way, gave me a question to ask him. And I said, hey man, I just want to ask you, if the Lord visited you, I was like, in whatever way, let's just say it was dramatic. Let's say you knew. Man, without a shadow of a doubt, man, it's undeniable. God visited me. Let's say it was a dream or it was whatever. Whatever way you knew that the Lord had come and encountered you, there was a visitation from God in your life. I said, and let's say the Lord spoke to you and was like, hey man, I'm looking to bring another little guy like Lou Engle or Reinhard Bonnke into the earth, or another little girl like Heidi Baker into the earth. And I'm looking at your house and I believe in what you're doing. Can I trust you to raise him for me? Can I trust you to raise her for me? Can I put her in your house? And would you be faithful to me? And would you train him? Would you train her? Would you raise them up and turn them to me so that I could fulfill my purpose for them? I need another one of these guys, these girls in the next 20 years, 30 years, and I want to trust you with them. And he looked at me and he was like, bro, you'd have to be an absolute moron to say no to God. And I was like, oh, okay. And he was like, bro, if the Lord came and said, man, he was trying to do something like that, you'd have to be an idiot to say no to the Lord. And I was like, all right. Then the real issue is not that you just see more kids as an inconvenience. It's just that you haven't yet connected with the power of God's purpose, potentially in more kids for you. I was like, because you don't have a problem with another kid. You just haven't yet connected with the purpose, and that purpose now eclipsing what you think are your own inconveniences in having another child. So, more kids is not an inconvenience, because we're not looking at the culture trying to define the terms of what success is by what the culture's standards are. And this is incredibly freeing in some cases, because all too often we think, man, if I have another baby, then I'm going to suffer and I'm going to have to let go of certain opportunities and And we think more in the terms of how we're going to have to sacrifice and things we're not going to be able to do. God can do all things, right? So for us, in the idea of having so many, first off, we have to be very organized so that it's not a Ringling Brothers circus around our house. But in the idea of our life together, I'll just say this. We have what we call non-negotiables, and it's the way that we see stewardship. Our life is going to involve certain things, and it's not up for question. We're not praying about it. It's not things that we're willing to allow them to become eclipsed. There's not other things that are more important than these things. It's why they're called non-negotiables. We are going to read the Bible together as a family. We are going to spend time together in prayer as a family. We are going to spend time in worship together as a family. We're going to have times and seasons where we are fasting together as a family. Now, you may be like, what do you mean, like kids fasting and all that? I'll just say, let me see, Isaiah was 3 or 4 when he gave up ice cream? 4. He was 4. I remember we were going on a 40-day fast, and we asked them to pray about what they felt Jesus was saying to them in the place of fasting. And Isaiah came back and was like, I'm giving up ice cream for 40 days, Dad. I was like, he's making the greatest sacrifice out of anybody in the house. his price that's being paid was like the widow's mite, right? Like more than all others, but he was convinced that he had heard from the Lord. He did the 40 days, no ice cream. He never asked. He never complained. It was, well, towards the end. Well, he didn't complain. He was sitting with me at lunch that one day and he was like, Dad, when's the fast gonna be over? I was like, we got a couple more days, buddy. But we have certain non-negotiables. We're going to be committed to the Lord, and our life is going to be planted in a spiritual family or in a community of faith.
And I think it's important to just to add again about what the authority of the house looks like and the training of how you're living it out. We always set the invitation before our kids and allow them to pray and make the choice on their own. So it's not like you're fasting because we're fasting, you know? It's like, it's important to actually, that's engaging them with their own connection with the Lord, to actually be able to hear God for themselves and to make the decision. And sometimes as it is with us, like when we're going to the Lord, maybe it's not this audible, and maybe sometimes it's just, I think it's this, I'm just not sure. We'll encourage them in that, like, hey, God, you're not going to miss out by giving more to him, even in that moment of training and opportunity. So it's always the invitation that we offer to them.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, our 15, 12, 10, and 6-year-olds, they all join us when we have times together as a family and we're fasting or whatnot. But our life is going to be planted in a church. We're going to be a part of a spiritual family. We're going to be a part of a body of believers that are journeying to live in covenant devotion to the Lord and to one another. We're going to spend time actually sharing meals with people over the course of the week. And it's actually a non-negotiable for us that week over week, we are going to either invite someone to our home or respond to an invitation to go to somebody else's house. It's a non-negotiable for us. It's something that is etched into our way of life that we see as an ultimate issue. It's an ultimate issue, meaning it's one of the most important ways that we could give our time, our resources, our energy and attention. And it does not get subjected to other things that may seem to be more immediately important or of greater concern. I'll give you an example. So my 15-year-old is starting second baseman on the softball team. Okay, great. First question was, how many times do you have to practice a week? Oh, well, I got this many practices a week. Okay, fantastic. What time is practice? Practice is going to be 3:30 to 5 o'clock, Dad. Okay, great. Because 5 o'clock, that still gives you enough time to be able to get to the house if you want to change and whatnot. We usually have dinner with people. You're going to be present for those. Because softball is not more important than you actually being present and sharing meals with people. Well, what if she has a child? No. Softball is not going to be more important than you actually being present and being with us together as a family when we are either opening up our home or we're responding to hospitable invitations from other people. Like, this is a non-negotiable for us, right? And this is what I mean. We have a certain template or grid of things that we believe are from the Lord given to us in what our life is supposed to look like. And it's a non-negotiable. They're not subject to other things. Everything else is actually subject to these things. And it's more important than maybe we realize, because the consistency is what matters over long periods of time, right? When we raise kids, allowing them to feel like, man, football's more important than prayer meetings. Well, baseball's more important than, and traveling baseball is more important than, being a part of a church. Well, I would never tell my kids that. Yeah, I mean, but you let them miss church for 4 months so that they could play first baseman on the baseball team because, traveling ball plays on the weekends for all their tournaments. You might not have intentionally indoctrinated them that way, but because of your accommodation, you trained them that way. Right? So the effort of our life is providing training, and it's creating a culture, either one that we want to acknowledge or not, but it's irrelevant if we want to acknowledge it or not. The culture that we have is the one that we allowed. And we have to see it that way. It's the one that we allowed. It may not be the one that I wanted, but it's the one that I got because I didn't intentionally create the one I wanted. Right? And that's where the responsibility comes back to us to actually govern over and to bear the authority to create the culture of our home that we actually want to be accountable to God for. And that we have people in that are being trained by what is the culture or the context that we're creating. Now I get it. When kids are super small, I remember we would sit together and man, we'd be sitting there. Our kids were 5, 3 and newborn, like I shared. And man, at 6, 4 and 1, at 7, 5 and 2, we weren't having these dynamic prayer meetings with our kids. We weren't having these Holy Ghost charged, revelatory little encounter sessions, with our kids. It took everything not to lose my sanity most days from trying to just read the Bible together. I'd be like, okay, buddy, so who actually obeyed the Lord and built the ark? Booger. It's like, what? Like, what are you, like, it's like, okay, like, who encountered God on the mountain and came down with the 10 commandments? And they'd be like, he farted. And it's like, bro, like, what? And just countless times, we'd be like, everybody go to bed. Just go to bed, it's over. Like, we're done trying for the day. We're gonna get up tomorrow, give it another shot, And just the days where you just felt like you were just immersed in it, nothing was actually happening, it wasn't actually succeeding, there were no quantifiable wins to provide you with encouragement. I'll just stay consistent to the recipe, right?
And not to feel like you have to reduce it down. I think at times when we think about our children, we limit their capacity of what they can even understand and what the Spirit is actually doing. Something Mike always talks about, I think it was Bill Johnson that said, like, there's no junior Holy Spirit that's given, like, to our children. Like, the same Spirit that's alive in us is alive in them. So even just in those moments, something that I love that Mike has done is probably since we were even youth pastors, it wasn't like he didn't create this whole youth experience of games and TVs and like, this is how we're going to keep their attention. They're going to love Jesus through this. But he's like, no, we're going to read the word. We're going to worship together and we're going to pray. So just even not to feel like we have to reduce it down. Like, obviously, when you were talking to a 6-year-old next to our 15-year-old, maybe the language has to be a little bit more simplified, but that doesn't mean you have to get away from these non-negotiables. Does that make sense? Like, it's important that you're actually reading the word together, and maybe even like certain scripture that you're like, that's going to be above their head. You'd be surprised at what they can actually comprehend and actually start to like catch on. Because we talk even to our 4-year-old and our 6-year-old, we're waking up and we're asking them, hey, did you have a dream? Like, we talk. Dreams and visions are very real. Like, the Lord encounters our children, He encounters us. So we talk about all those things. And so just not to feel like you have to reduce it down or water it down. I feel like that was a big part for us.
Yeah, not watering it down. But especially in those days, I think the importance of just staying the course and not trying to deviate because you're evaluating the moment to moment, but creating a bigger and broader picture for what success looks like and also how to actually qualify if things are working or not, right? I always use the example of, let's just say, grandmama's recipe, whatever it is. If you get the recipe, you know that the recipe is going to produce a certain product. Stick to the recipe. When you're moving through the individual ingredients and when you're mixing stuff and when you're putting it all together, it may sometimes look like a mess. It may not taste good along the way. But if you just stay faithful to the recipe, it actually, in the end, ends up producing a certain product. And when you can evaluate the product that the recipe is producing, it begins to build confidence once you've established a certain amount of history to then be able to be energized, right, in giving it a go. You know, we have a unique privilege. I say often that, you know, like I shared with the 2 sets of 3 that we have, we now have 15, my son's gonna be 13 next month, so 15, 13, and 10. I can look at my 15, 13, and 10-year-old and ask myself, do I want my 5, 3, and 1-year-old to actually be what they are? Because there's 10-year separation now between, you know, the different brackets. Because I can look at the life of my 15-year-old and I can ask myself certain questions, not based off of what I felt like my effort was, but based off of the fruit. Right? We're evaluating fruit. We're looking at the fruitfulness of what has been our investment over time. And I can ask myself questions. Do I actually want another one like this? If so, keep on keeping on. But if not, then I need to try to make some adjustments. Why? Because what has been produced over time, right? And that's not to in any way say that it's all on us and that they don't have choices and all of that. I get all of that. You understand what I'm saying, is the format, the template, our effort that we've given that was at work in the lives of our older ones. We can stay consistent and know that it would provide the same opportunity for the ones that are coming up behind them. And it is really, really important to remain faithful even when it doesn't feel like much is happening. Yeah. But that's much of our life anyways, right? That's much of our life anyways. Stay faithful to what we know is the recipe, the non-negotiables, and the way. Do you have anything else you want to share? Or we take questions? Oh, yeah.
No, I'm saying we can take questions.
So one of the questions that came in was around technology. And like, I think it's safe to say that we're asking, and again, you guys have left room for it. So there are non-negotiables that Mike and Anna have listed, some of which obviously should be for all of us, most of which should be for all of us, of course. We can read the verses and get that for ourselves. But it's good to hear that this is actually what's being implemented in their own home, right? But Mike, Anna, how do you guys handle technology as far as like what you're allowing and what you're not allowing? That was kind of the first part of that. And then the second part is spend the night company. You know, as they're getting older, it's, hey, I want to stay at so-and-so's house. And then when you tell them, hey, you know, that's not okay, there's a reason behind why you're saying that. There's some that you turn loose a little bit loosely, like if Uncle Steve's going to keep the kids, you don't think twice about that. However, that may not be the case everywhere. So technology, what you guys are kind of allowing and not allowing, and then how do you guys handle spend the night company?
So we were kind of, I'll let you share after this, kind of talking about this with Abby beforehand. So the interesting thing about why the non-negotiables are what they are, and even like you and your spouse together, having the voice of the Lord in your life is so important. The crazy thing is, like, whenever you walk with Jesus, there are certain things that he is going to speak to, and there are going to be convictions that you hold on to that are really important for your own journey, and then I believe for the journey of your family. So with saying that, I feel like there's some things that are, what would you call them? Like, some things you just have to pray and ask the Lord for. Like, what are these convictions for me and my house? Because I feel like even in the conversation of technology or sleepovers or anything, like all of that, screen time, whatever you want to call it, there's certain convictions that I've watched others carry that may look a little bit different than what we carry. Does that make sense? So you have to leave room for the Spirit to kind of like create some of those boundaries, but I don't know if you want to share like what we do. I don't know, and then elaborate maybe.
Yeah, I think like Anna's saying, because she's trying to be cautious in not just laying out things that may seem like legislative in this area. You know, Romans 14 speaks of a body with diverse ways to live out convictions. and the challenge at times that we have as a community of faith in making room for other people who actually love God that just live convictions differently than we do. That's what Romans 14 is all about, right? So in that sphere, we have to identify what's principle and what's preference. Because at times, in everything I listen to, I'm trying to identify what's the principle in what's being said and what's just a person's nuance, their preference of the way that principle gets lived. Because too many times we legislate the preference of how a principle gets lived, and we don't allow enough room for diversity that opens people up to actually be shepherded by Jesus. And we legislate a nuance, when in reality, we could have just exposed people to the principle and then trusted the Lord to actually form those things individually in the place of people's unique convictions. So for us, we let people come and stay the night at our house. We are very peculiar, if at all, if our kids are going to spend the night other places. I believe the best about some folks. I would say everybody, but this is not true. I don't know how everybody lives when they go home. You know, I know at times you can look at the fruit or the evidence that we have as data points in other people's lives. And so the gathering of data from the things that are out front or observable sometimes leads me to the conclusion where I have to tell my kids, no, you can't go stay at so-and-so's house. Well, why not? Because so-and-so acts like this whenever we're in public spaces or observable areas. I can't imagine what things are like whenever we get back to the house. So the answer is no. And there's not been many times where it's been that super confrontational, because we always put it back into the area of reminding our kids what loving Jesus looks like for us. Yeah. It may not look that way for everybody else. Everybody can say they love Jesus, and that's amazing. We know the way that Jesus has asked us to walk with him and to love him in the way that we walk with him. And so, you know, we're really peculiar about where our kids are able to go, and if at all they're able to stay the night with anybody. We're more comfortable with people obviously coming our way. That's just because we believe in the context that we've created, and we also understand that our kids recognize the boundaries and different limitations and privileges that they enjoy, because the limitations are a privilege, because we're protecting them, and the things that they can experience are a privilege. So, you know, we use that kind of as a gauge. I know that's not super helpful, but that is the answer that I'm going to give. Just because it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not a universal type thing. You know, we honestly have to pray. And there are times when the Lord really does speak to us and is like, no, they can't go there. It's like, okay. It doesn't matter to me if Jimmy Jack has been on the board of the church for 40 years, and I don't care about none of those things. You know what I'm saying? I don't care about any of the other things that would at times lead us to conclusions about people or incentivize us beyond the threshold of actually taking it to the Lord, right? I'm making no assumptions about anybody. I'm processing everything in prayer, and I'm trying to be responsible to God, especially with my kids. Right? And so there are conclusions that we come to, like Anna said, that oftentimes is just based out of prayer, purely. Not because we're trying to feel certain types of ways, and that's okay, because people don't have to understand, and I'm totally fine with that. Hey, why can't your kids come stay the night? Because I said no. Oh, well, what are you trying to say? I'm trying to say no. That's actually what I'm trying to say, and it doesn't have to be more complicated than that. I mean, you can make it a problem if you want to make it a problem. It's not a problem for me. I just said no. Like, they can still hang out, but no, you know. Then I think in the area of screen time, I mean, we have some, I mean, I guess you could say a framework that we kind of use. You know, for instance, our two older kids have phones. They didn't get them till they were 12, 13. We did not give them to them so that they could then, you know, use them purely as an entertainment device or feel like they had access to the whole world.
Sometimes they try. We have to remind them.
Like only our older two have phones. When they come home, they put them in a particular place. They're out in the open. They're never allowed to have them in their rooms. They're not just able to sit on them for unending amounts of time. We keep them in a particular place in the house
iPads
where a
too.
bunch of other devices are. It doesn't matter if it's an iPad, if it's, whatever, a phone, all of those things go in a particular space. They have to ask to use them. They have to sit in common areas if they're going to use them, because if you can't do what you're doing in front of a bunch of other people, you probably shouldn't be doing it. They're not allowed to have them in their rooms. They don't have TVs in their rooms. We've never allowed them to have TVs in their rooms.
And that goes beyond just like because I think sometimes making those decisions can be based out of fear. Don't let any of your decisions be based out of fear. Just think of the protection and the purity of the house. So just even like some of those decisions that we made was just like, hey, like when we're here, we want to be together. And so it's just funny, like we're always usually all in the same room together. Like it's always a lot of people right there, but we're just together. Like it's, so, we have video game devices, but it's all usually like timed, like of when they can play, like what they get done, like they have responsibility in the house as well. So it's like, have you actually accomplished the responsibility that you carry in the house? We're in this together. If you haven't, then none of that until you can actually do that. Movies, it's interesting because like Mike said, our age group is so different. So we have older ones that are getting up into teenage years, and then we still have like really little ones. So obviously like the gauging of they don't watch movies without us. Like we usually watch them all together the first time so we can actually determine like the content that's in it. And we also have a website that we go to kind of like pick through of what's in the movie, which is a good thing to have. If you don't know about that, it's called Plugged In. You can always look up movies, what's the content that they're saying, language, those types of things. So we kind of look at that. And then when people are coming to our house, this is what I was telling Abby earlier, we understand, like, whenever you jealously live together, again, we're having people over for meals, like people are in the house, there's certain just rules and boundaries that we have. Like nobody's in the bedrooms together. Like we're all in common areas together. Like doors are open. Like, those types of things are important. But also like, okay, like some of the little kids want to put a movie on. Well, we always respect the convictions and the boundaries of others as well. When you're having people over, so we always ask like, hey, find out if they can watch that movie. See if that's something they can watch. If they can't, it's cool. My kids know. Okay, cool. Like, nope, can't watch that. And so those are just some of the things that we've done with those types of.
Yeah, screen time limitations, certain boundaries of, just simple things. Like my older kids, they're not allowed to have certain apps on their phone. They don't have access to social media. They don't need any of that. It's just going to unnecessarily complicate their lives. They don't have YouTube. They don't, so just very simple ways, that we try to govern. And in governing, it's ultimately for their good because we are the protectors of their innocence. And we're responsible for that, right? And wanting to be a good steward. Now, I get it. They're in the world. And we're not going to be able to protect them from the world at all times, but we want to train them how to be in the world but not be of the world. And so it's a major factor in the way that we try to approach a lot of these different conversations.
So we'll ask one more question and then wrap our time up because it is 12. But this is a great one, just specifically because you guys hit on having it as a non-negotiable, where you guys are in an intentional way, weekly way, spending time with other families in your home as well as when you receive invitations to be in others' homes. So we'll ask this one and probably pray and dismiss us for our time today. But how do you guys balance the importance of scheduling? Because we know that things like being in bed at a certain time, knowing that we got to wake up early in the morning. We have school, we have responsibilities in the following morning. However, when we're sharing our life with people, oftentimes it can run into late evenings. So to ask the question, even in a specific way of how it was presented, Schedules are important. One thing that we can say about Mike and Anna is that we know they are organized people. As Mike said, they have to be with the amount of children that they have. How are you guys incorporating late night meetings and even like house church gatherings when, as you said, we're wanting to include the children and not using the excuse of, well, I have kids, so I can't come and be a part of that because the house church, may get over around 8:30 and we want our kids to be in bed at 7:30. But if it's a non-negotiable, I hope that question makes sense. I can ask it a better way if I need to.
I would prefer to be in bed by 8:30, honestly.
We know.
Just a personal preference.
Yeah, so there's, I don't think allowance is the same thing as compromise sometimes, right? Like for things that we determine are non-negotiables or their value concerns, we host meetings during the week at our place too. We may not be trying to blow it out till midnight, and I don't think that that's sometimes necessary. We do have 6. I don't want to be somewhere at 11 o'clock with my 10-month-old or my 3-year-old. It doesn't sound like a great time to me, So I think we're really good about choosing our participation, but then also realizing our boundaries from within participating. We can come and participate. Now if it doesn't start till 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, you're probably not going to get us. Like we have people reach out to us at New Year's all the time. And they're like, oh, what are y'all doing? And I'm like, bro, I know my season. I'm going to be at the house. I don't want to be out somewhere watching fireworks at midnight. I've got a 5, 3, and newborn. You know what I mean? Like at the time. It's like, that's just not where I'm going to be. But I do think when there are value concerns, for us, we're choosing to participate in things that are value concerns for us. So having people at our house, we're not super rigid, like, hey man, it's 8:15, it's been great having y'all, like, get out. Sometimes, now when it's life together, because I do think that it's worth mentioning, when it's life together, we don't have to try to win it all in one time, or one event, or one evening. It's life together. Yeah. So if I know that I'm only going to see you once a year, then yeah, maybe if we meet at 5, we're going to be together till like 10. But if I'm going to see you once a week, I have no problem saying, hey bro, look, like, I know how your life works, you know how my life works. Let's do 5 to 8. I'm going to see you next week. And starting to be realistic in the convictions that we all carry together and allowing our life together to actually flourish. But we don't use, the reality of having a lot of kids not to participate in stuff. It's not going to be an every night thing. We pick our moments because it's not necessarily that healthy for us, because then we don't have the consistency in what's our organization to train our kids the way that we're trying to. So it's not going to be an everyday ordeal where we just, blow the system up and, it becomes a free-for-all and we go for it because there's a lot going on. It's like, no, even from within the realm of a lot going on, we try to hold to what is our organization and values, but still participate because it's healthy and it's necessary and it's right. So we try to do as best as we can at balancing the two. Because we realize that it's the template, it's the organization, and the consistency of that template that's actually providing the training for our kids that we want them to receive. So it can't just be every day is going to be spontaneous and we're just going to be involved in whatever thing is going on and whatever way the wind blows and everything is subject to the immediacy and the urgency of everything. It's like, no, that doesn't work. So there's got to be a framework for what the week is going to look like, and then we pick and choose, like where our little accommodations are going to be made. Like we'll look at each other from time to time and say like, hey, what's on the calendar for Thursday night? Nothing. Okay, great. That's what's on the calendar for Thursday night. Like, that's the plan. The plan is to have nothing going on and to just be together, or we together week by week are looking at the calendar week by week, month over month, and we're making plans, because when the system is off, it not only affects them, it affects us. Yeah. And it affects our time together, it affects the way that the house flows, and it affects everybody in reality. So the organization is actually one of the things that's helping us to provide the training that we're trying to provide.
I just wanted to follow up and say, y'all have been great. I mean, I'm just so excited. I teach child development, and we have raised 3 children. We've done some things well, and we've done some things really, really wrong. But I just had 3 points I wanted to follow up on with the wisdom that you all have given. First of all, we've said if we'd had a sense of humor along the way, we would have been a lot better off. So just remember, you're not going to be the first perfect parent, and you're not going to raise perfect children. So give each other a break.
Come on.
Don't expect your spouse to be perfect, and don't expect yourself to be perfect. Yeah. Just appreciate the fact that you're on the journey together, and you're just going to do the darn best you can every day. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, ladies, this is for you, and this is a little bit harsh. Mike talked about men stepping up and being involved in the house. Ladies, you got to let him. And it's easy a lot of times for us because we are handling the details and we're in charge. And a lot of times husbands come in a little harsher than we think needs to happen. I'm not talking to non-believers. I'm talking to believing Christian husbands that want to lead well. I remember in our household, sometimes I'd say, children, go get your dirty clothes, go get your dirty clothes, go get your dirty clothes. Nobody ever got the dirty clothes. I'd say, he'd come in. I didn't do this often, but I would say, would you please? And he'd say, get the dirty clothes. In 30 seconds, the clothes were taken care of.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, they need a father.
Oh, yeah.
And a father is a little rougher and a little tougher than the mother. Let your father, your husband, be the father. Okay? They need that authority. They need to toughen up. If he's abusive, if he is not a believer, that's another category. But if he loves the Lord, let him be who he has been called to be in the Lord. And don't undercut him, and don't take away his authority, and show respect. Even if your baby's crying in the corner because daddy got onto him. Well, they need to toughen up, and they need to obey the father. So that. And then the sense of humor, let the father, and then communicate with each other. Just like I agree with what Anna said. Discuss things. Again, it doesn't have to be like a rigid, we are the law. But when Mike was talking about bringing them into the things that are a priority in the household, be sure it's a fun household. That really turns people away from the things of the Lord if we're so rigid and we're so uptight and they cannot go with their friends and it looks like the rest of the world is having fun and we have to follow all those rules. Well, just make sure it's fun. It's not going to be fun every minute, but enjoy each other. Let them see you enjoying each other. And then when you're talking about setting priorities, y'all's priorities don't have to be exactly what theirs were. We also had big decisions about travel ball. I couldn't take it. I could not take it. But it wasn't because I wanted to be in communion with other people. It's because I wanted date night. And we had the discussion. Our marriage is going to suffer if we're at the ballpark every weekend. Did it hurt one of my son's feelings very badly? Yes. It was the decision we made because our marriage was more important than one child. So pay attention to the decisions you're making. And this is the last thing I'll say. 2 things. Okay. The authority and stewardship is so important. I'm just saying y'all study that. Authority and stewardship is where it's at. That's what it's all about. And then look honestly and speak to each other. Is our household God worshiping or child worshiping? And in America right now, a lot of families are child worshiped. Look at yourself. What is actually being worshiped? And our job as parents, just like they said, is to raise these children to love the Lord and walk out the life that the Lord has asked them, has given them purpose in. It is not our job to be their best friend or make them happy every day. It is your job to equip them. It is your job to give them what they need to then know who the Lord is, have some skills, realize they have the power to be a voice for the Lord. So thank y'all so much.
Amen.